Hello everyone and welcome to Code Rhetoric with Tam Talk. On today's video, we'll be doing a surgical code with me and we'll be focusing on the ears, nose, and throat. So just want to add our disclaimer that the surgical case that we are about to review is a fictitious operative report and its sole purpose is for teaching only. Again, it is only for teaching purposes. The coding tools used are also recommendations only. This is not a sponsored video. And I also include our FTC disclaimer. So there's some links are affiliate links. I may receive a small commission. However, my recommendations are based on personal usage and or experience. So again, this is not a sponsored video. And again, the surgical case that we're about to embark on is a fictitious operative report utilized for teaching purposes only. So the coding essentials that are required for this session is, of course, our 2022 coding manuals, which includes the ICD-10 CM manual, your CPT or current procedural terminology manual, as well as your HCPCS. Now, these can be either physical or in the electronic format. And then you also want to have access to an encoder such as 3M, Codify, and Optum. And so for this episode or this video, I will actually be using Codify, which is the encoder via AAPC. So in this episode, we'll be coding a revision, rhinoplasty, and a left conchal cartilage harvest. So again, that is the revision of a rhinoplasty as well as a left conchal cartilage harvest. Now, as we go through our surgical case, I will be including some of the questions that we need to ask ourselves in order to dissect the appropriate information that we need to successfully code our encounter. So we're going to start with our diagnosis. Our diagnosis is the what, or I would say actually it's probably more so the why. Why are we performing this procedure? So this is where we look at our preoperative as well as our postoperative diagnosis. So the preoperative diagnosis is nasal deformity, and the patient is also status post rhinoplasty. So this patient has actually had a rhinoplasty previously, so they're status post that. And I'm going to go on the assumption that because of the status post rhinoplasty, the patient developed a nasal deformity. And so when we get into our postoperative diagnosis, as you can see, it is stated that it is the same. So pretty much is straightforward. The reason why we're doing this procedure is, again, because the patient has developed a nasal deformity status post a previous rhinoplasty procedure. So our next phase is the indications for the procedure. Again, the question of why. Why are we performing this procedure? So based upon the surgeon's indications for procedure, it states that the patient is an otherwise healthy male patient who had a previous nasal fracture, as I had assumed previously. During the healing process, the patient had also sustained a hypopnea puck to the nose, which resulted in a saddle nose deformity with septal hematoma. The patient did heal or recover, however, status post rhinoplasty. As a result, the patient was left with a left persistent saddle nose dorsal defect. And so they're going in again to correct that, which is that nasal deformity. So prior to entering the orifice or the body, you want to make sure you get the consent. So the doctor just did document that the patient was consented for the above stated procedure. The risks, the benefits, as well as the alternatives were discussed with the patient. And then I made a little keynote here. You want to make sure the patient has consented to the procedure. And be careful when you're reading or prior to signing the consent form, because this is also where the patient is agreeing to pay the balance billing for out-of-network services, which falls under that surprise billing. So, but that's another episode, another video. But again, you want to make sure we're reviewing the indications for the procedures. Again, this is our why. Why are we doing this procedure? So the description of the procedure, this is actually where many coders, and I would say many new coders, want to skim, because sometimes the description of the procedure is very lengthy, is very detailed, and you don't want to overlook this or perhaps skim it. It depends. But bottom line, you don't want to skip it at all, period. You want to read it, because this is where the surgeon is actually providing you play-by-play, step-by-step on what actually was performed or what was done. And so this is where you're going to confirm whether or not that procedure that the doctor mentioned that he or she was going to perform was actually completed. And then also some of the information in the description of the procedure will also guide you to the appropriate selection of your CPT or surgical code. So I like to call this part the how. How did we do this? How did we perform this procedure? How did we resolve this issue? How did we resolve the diagnosis? So we're going to go through and just kind of pick out some of the main things that we need. But again, this is for the sake of time. But again, you don't want to skip over this part. If any parts of surgical coding, this is the part that you want to definitely review, okay? Because again, anything could change just because the title states that this is what he or she is doing. That doesn't mean that that's actually what was done, because anything could change. They could run into complications. There could be some unforeseen issues once they enter the body that they did not prepare or was unaware of, and that may change the way that they do things. It may end the procedural session. It may change how they approach the particular area that they're going to be performing surgery, or it could be numerous things. This also will help you determine if you need to add modifiers to kind of provide further clarification of what actually transpired in the OR. So we're going to go in and we're going to go real quickly again, because I will say this is a lengthy description of the procedure. So pretty much the patient was prepped and draped in the usual sterile fashion. The patient did have approximately 12 milliliters of lidocaine with epinephrine, 1% with 1 to 100,000 infiltrated into the nasal soft tissues. So we're going to go on. We see that pretty much they're prepping the patient. At this point, the attention was turned to the left ear. Approximately 3 milliliters of 1% lidocaine with 1 to 100,000 epinephrine. Again, he's still providing anesthetics. And you'll see that as we get further into the note that general anesthesia was also administered, but again, the doctor is actually administering some local anesthetics as well for that particular area that he or she is working on, excuse me. And so now we go in to see how he's entering the body. So a 15-inch blade was used to incise along the posterior conchal area, and a freer elevator was utilized to lift the soft tissues of the conchal cartilage in a submucoperiochondral plane. So this is where your medical terminology is very important. Your medical terminology and your anatomy and physiology, because sometimes a lot of the surgical procedures codes are based on how, again, the surgeon approached the body orifice. So he did say that he made a posterior, I want to make sure I'm reading the posterior aspect. So we know the anterior is front, posterior is back. So we want to know, okay, if I was looking for this particular procedure and if it was broken out by anterior or posterior, we know that he approached it via the posterior aspect, right? And then he did, he lifted the soft tissues off the conchal cartilage in a submucoperiochondral plane. So again, it's how he entered that particular area, right? And then he completed this along with the posterior aspect of the conchal cartilage, which was transected in the concha cavum and concha cymum. Again, this is where that anatomy and physiology will be very important, because you want to know where the doctor is actually performing the procedure. If you don't know medical terminology, if you don't know anatomy and physiology, I'm going to leave it at that, but I'll also add some additional resources that you can get as far as like illustrations. There are some in your CPT book as well as your ICD-10 manuals, but there's also an illustration book that I used back when I was doing orthopedics that was really good. It covered different areas, so that when I'm coding for a particular surgeon, I am well aware of what he or she is doing and where they're performing that particular procedure, right? So that's very important. And so we'll move forward. I've digressed. So they said these were placed as, both were harvested. So he harvested cartilage from the concha cavum as well as the concha cymba, and they were harvested. So harvested means they were removed in a sense, right? They were picked out. And so they placed those particular tissue particles in some saline, and then he closed that particular area up, which is the hemostasis was obtained with electrocauterization, and then he used both electrocauterization and was also employed as needed. So he's showing you, okay, I approached the body part here. This is what I did in this body part, and then I'm closing it up. So again, the description is really telling you play by play, the step by step, and what transpired during that particular encounter. Okay, so once he completed that portion of the procedure, now we're moving into a different portion of the procedure. So he's mentioning that the entire length of the wound was then closed with 5/0 plain running locking suture. So he's done with that part with the harvesting. Now his attention is turned to the patient, where the patient had a tefla placed both anterior as well as posterior to the conchal defect and placed in a sandwich dressing utilizing a 2/0 proline suture. Right? Then an antibiotic ointment was applied generously. So he's done with that part. Now he's moving on and he's redirecting his attention to where he's opening and lifting the soft tissues of the nose, right? So a typical external columella, inverted B gold wing incision was placed on the columella and trailed into a marginal incision. That's a mouthful. So pretty much he's telling you he moved to the nose. This is the type of incision that was made into this particular area of the nose, right? It said the soft tissues of the nose were then elevated using curved, sharp scissors and medicine bombs, right? Medicine bombs. Soft tissues were elevated over the lower lateral cartilages, upper lateral cartilages onto the nasal dorsum. So again, he's telling you play by play, step by step, as into what he's doing. He told you he harvested the tissue, he closed that area up. Now he's over here. This is the type of cut I'm making or incision I'm making. This is also what I'm doing. So again, it's very important that you read through the entire procedural note to see what happened. And then, so he's telling you he's, again, uplifted the cartilage. And then at this point, the attention was then turned to osteotomies. So for those of you who are new to coding or unfamiliar with the word osteotomies, osteo has to do with bone, and then otomies has to do with incision. So he's making an incision into the bone, and he's examining the external cartilages, right? So then the patient did have very broad lower lateral cartilage leading to a bulbous tip. The lower lateral cartilage was trimmed in a symmetrical fashion, and then at least 8 millimeters of lower lateral cartilage bilateral along the lateral aspect. So yeah, you probably can't see it because of my video here, but yeah, so I'm going to turn my camera off so that we can see the full screen. Much better, much better. Okay, so again, this is a long procedural note. So having completed this, the patient had medial and lateral osteotomies performed with a 2 millimeter osteotome. So that osteotome is an instrument, right? So these were done transmucosally, on my pronunciation here. So trans means across. So he went across the mucosa, right? After elevating the tract using a caudal elevator. Direct hemostasis pressure was applied to assist with bruising. Next, attention was turned to tip mechanisms. The patient had a series of double dome sutures placed into the nasal tip. So now he's suturing up the nasal tip, right? Then a 5/0 Dexon was employed for intradermal suturing. 5/0 clear proline was used for intradermal suturing. And then having completed this, a 5/0 clear proline alar spanning suture was employed to narrow the superior tip area. So again, he's telling you so we know he's done some harvesting, he's made some incisions, as well as some excisions. He's made some incisions into the bone, and now he's showing you that he's closing up all of these areas. He's making these corrections, he's closing up all of these areas. So again, he's giving you a play-by-play of what actually transpired. And just when we think we're done, we're still reading the description of the procedure. So then next, our surgeon's attention was turned to the dorsal augmentation, where he utilized a Gore-Tex small implant, which was selected prior to the incision, or for previously inside. Excuse me. This was taken to the back table and carved under sterile conditions. So they're still in the same OR, suite, except for the material or the implant that's being utilized. They're preparing it on the back table to keep it sterile prior to implanting it into the body. Anyway, the patient then had the implant placed into the supratip area to assist with the support of the nasal dorsum. So again, they're using the implant to help undeform the deform. And so, next, the attention was turning to performing a columellum strut. The cartilage from the concha was shaped into a strut and placed into a precision pocket between the medial footplate of the lower lateral cartilage. This was fixed into position utilizing a 5-0 Dexon suture. Having completed the placement of all augmentation grafts, the patient was examined for hemostasis. So here, I'm going to take a pause. So again, they harvested tissue from the concha. They went into the nasal area cavity, and they did the work there, and they implanted the implant. And so now the surgeon is going back to double check all the areas that he provided or he performed work to ensure that they're all stable, that the hemostasis, that they're bleeding like appropriately, and the right suturing, just double checking everything to avoid any complications. So then it said the external columellar inverted gold wig incision along the nasal tip was closed with a series of interrupted everting 6-0 black nylon sutures. The entire marginal incisions for cosmetic rhinoplasty were closed, utilizing a series of 5-0 plain interrupted sutures. And again, just when you thought it was over, it is not. So at the termination of the case, the ear was inspected and the position of the conchal cartilage harvest was hemostatic. There was no evidence of a hematoma, and the patient had a series of brown steri strips and aquaplast casts placed over the nasal dorsum. So again, the doctor again is going back, double checking the areas to make sure everything is copacetic, bleeding appropriately, sutured or bandaged appropriately. And then he said the intranasal area was then examined at the termination of the case, and it seemed to be hemostatic as well. The patient was then transferred to PACU in stable condition. He was charged to home on antibiotics to prevent infection, both from the left ear as well as the left ear conchal cartilage harvest, and also at the Gore-Tex implant area. He was asked to follow up in 4 days for removal of the bolster overlying the conchal cartilage harvest. So pretty much when you see this term or the word termination, we know that it's coming to an end, because termination means it is at the end, we're cutting off, we're terminating. So yes, so is this the end of our procedure? Is it? Let's find out. So now that we've had the opportunity to review the actual operative report, let's move into the coding part of it. So the tool that I'll be using for this particular operative session is the Codify Encoder tool. Again, this is through AAPC. They do have various subscription options if you're interested in using their tool, and it's actually been pretty beneficial. So I will leave the link for this as well in the description box below. So here we have our Codify, which is our encoder that we'll be utilizing for this operative session. Again, the Codify is through AAPC. If you are an AAPC coder, of course, you will have that option to purchase this subscription. And they do have various subscriptions based on your coding role or capacity at the particular time. And so right here, we have, again, our Medicare National Correct Coding Initiative, also known as NCCI or CCI Edits, and you may hear the play on either term if you're in a coding environment. And so what I love about this is that it has the different breakdowns for you so that you can input your CPT codes. For example, it has the entry method where it's going to be auto input, a comma, or what have you, and then you're able to make it make a default with it. The things that you want to make sure when you're running your codes through the encoder is you want to make sure that your version date is current, that is up to date, and then you want to make sure your locality is accurate as well. And so if you can see here where it has a number of codes, it has several spaces where you can input your CPT codes. And then once you get here, once we input all of our codes, as you can see here, we have 2 codes. We're going to go ahead and click the NCCI check just to verify if those codes are bundled, unbundled, or could possibly be reported with the applicable modifier. So once we click our NCCI edit check button, it brings up this screen. And what I love about this screen is you have the 3 color codes at the top, just like a stoplight. You have your green for go, your red for stop, and your orange or yellow for warning or caution. And so what I love about this is, again, if it's green, that means that the codes are okay to be reported together. If it's red, then no, then this would be considered unbundling if reported in absolute no way, shape, or form should these codes be reported together. And then the orange is for a modifier may be applicable, and then this you just don't want to assign a modifier because it's orange or yellow, but you want to make sure your documentation coincides with the usage of a modifier. If not, then you're going to be unbundling your services, and for those of you who are new to coding, that is fraud. And we don't want to do that. So again, green is for go, red is for stop, and yellow orange is for warning. And so as you can see here with our 2 codes, we have green. So these 2 codes are good to go for coding. Another thing that I want to point out is that with the Codify, you have all the resources at your fingertips, from the modifiers, your CBT assistant, your lay terms, your specialty coding alerts, as well as a crosswalk to the anesthesia primary code and the unit value. And then in surgery, you want to definitely pay attention to the global days, global surgical period, because sometimes you want to make sure that you're not overlapping in your procedures and your days. And if that is the case, you want to make sure you're assigning an applicable modifier to those encounters. So guys, we did it. We have our coding outcome. So our ICD-10 codes are M9 5.0, which represents the nasal deformity, and then Z42.8, which represents the encounter other plastic and reconstructive surgery following a medical procedure or healed injury. Then we have our CPT codes 30450 and then 21235. And I'll put a description or a further explanation in the description box. So that concludes our surgical coding with Tam talk. To get in contact with me, please follow me or visit my website at www.abrahammedicalcodingcoachllc.com. You can also email me if you have any questions or for business inquiries only. And then make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, we're out.